welcome back to the Velvet Underworld channels. And after this video, I would really like to know your thoughts about these stories. Feel free to share it under the comment sections and where you come from so that we could connect to each other better through this channel. Thank you.
At 30,000 feet, a baby's scream shattered the silence of first class, and with it, the iron control of the most dangerous man in the underworld. Victor Moreau could command empires with a whisper, but he couldn't silence his newborn son's desperate cries. 3 rows ahead, Elena Brooks heard something no one else did. Not annoyance, but agony. The grief-stricken nurse didn't know that standing up would save a life, doom her own, and change everything. If you want to know how a single act of kindness can ignite a war, stay with me until the end. And if this story moves you, hit that like button and comment with your city so I can see how far this tale travels across the world. The cabin of Flight 447 to New York hummed with the quiet privilege of first class. Leather seats, champagne flutes, and the soft rustle of newspapers. Passengers settled into their cocoons of comfort, prepared for 7 hours of undisturbed luxury across the Atlantic. Business executives tapped away at laptops. A young couple whispered honeymoon plans. An elderly woman dozed behind designer sunglasses. Then the crying started. It began as a whimper, tentative and small, before escalating into a full-throated wail that sliced through the carefully maintained peace like a blade. Heads turned, faces tightened with irritation. The flight attendants exchanged worried glances, their professional smiles strained. In seat 2A, Victor Moreau sat rigid as stone, his jaw clenched so tight it could crack diamonds. The infant in his arms, barely 3 weeks old, screamed with the kind of desperation that came from a need no adult could understand. The baby's face was crimson, tiny fists pumping in fury, lungs working overtime to protest some nameless agony. Victor was a man accustomed to control. In the shadowed corridors of power where he operated, his word was absolute. Men twice his size stepped aside when he entered a room. Entire organizations shifted at his command. He'd built an empire on the razor's edge between legitimate business and the kind of influence that existed in whispered conversations and sealed envelopes. At 38, Victor Moreau was feared, respected, and utterly alone, except for the screaming child in his arms. "Sir, perhaps if we tried warming the bottle again?" The flight attendant hovered nearby, her voice professionally gentle but edged with desperation. This was her third attempt in 20 minutes. Victor didn't look at her. His dark eyes, the color of midnight before a storm, remained fixed on his son's anguished face. The baby's name was Gabriel, though Victor had barely spoken it aloud since leaving the hospital in Paris. Saying the name made it real, made the loss real. "He won't take it," Victor said, his accent carrying the polish of expensive European schools layered over something rougher, older. "He hasn't taken a bottle since we boarded." The flight attendant bit her lip. Around them, the ambient hostility was building like pressure before a thunderstorm. A man in 3C muttered something about inconsiderate parents, loud enough to be heard. The woman across the aisle had her noise-canceling headphones cranked so high the music leaked out in tinny beats. Victor felt every stare like a physical weight. He'd faced down armed rivals without flinching, negotiated million-dollar deals without breaking a sweat, but the judgment in this cabin made his skin prickle with an unfamiliar emotion, helplessness. Gabriel's cries intensified, each shriek more desperate than the last. The baby arched his back, refusing the bottle Victor attempted to press to his lips. Formula dribbled down the infant's chin, wasted and rejected. "Please," Victor whispered, so quietly only the baby could hear. "Please, Gabriel." But the child only screamed louder, as if he knew, somehow knew, that the arms holding him were the wrong ones, that the person he needed, the one whose heartbeat had been his whole world for 9 months, was gone forever. 3 rows ahead, Elena Brooks heard the crying and felt something crack open in her chest. She'd been staring out the window at clouds painted gold by the setting sun, trying not to think about the empty apartment waiting for her in New York, trying not to count the days since the accident, trying not to remember the weight of her daughter in her arms, that last time in the hospital when the machines finally went silent. 4 months. It had been 4 months, and the grief was still a living thing inside her, coiled around her ribs like barbed wire. The baby's cries cut through her carefully constructed numbness. Elena knew that sound. She'd been a pediatric nurse for 6 years before Sophie was born, before the drunk driver ran the red light, before her entire world collapsed into a before and after divided by a single terrible moment. She knew the difference between a baby who was tired or hungry or uncomfortable and a baby who was starving for something no bottle could provide. Elena was 29 but felt ancient. She'd left London to escape the suffocating sympathy of friends who didn't know what to say, the apartment full of Sophie's things she couldn't bear to pack away, the playground she had to walk past every day on her way to the tube. New York was supposed to be a fresh start, a place where no one knew her story, where she could disappear into millions of strangers, and maybe, eventually, remember how to breathe without it hurting. The crying continued, growing more frantic. Elena closed her eyes, but that made it worse. Behind her eyelids, she saw Sophie's face, heard Sophie's cries from those early, desperate weeks when Elena had been a new mother, terrified and exhausted, certain she was doing everything wrong. But she'd learned. She'd figured it out. She'd become the mother Sophie needed. And now Sophie was gone, and some other child was screaming, and Elena couldn't make herself not care. She turned in her seat, craning her neck to see the source of the disturbance. Through the gaps between seats, she caught glimpses. A man's broad shoulder in an expensive suit, dark hair, and the edge of a pale blue blanket. The flight attendant was speaking in low, urgent tones, but the crying didn't stop. Elena's hands tightened on the armrests. This wasn't her problem. She had her own grief to manage. She'd promised herself she wouldn't get involved, wouldn't let the pain back in. She was going to New York to forget, not to remember. But the crying continued, and it sounded so much like suffering that Elena couldn't sit still anymore. Before she could talk herself out of it, she unbuckled her seatbelt and stood. The flight attendant near her seat looked up in surprise as Elena moved into the aisle, walking against the current of settling passengers toward the front of the cabin. The man in seat 2A didn't notice her approach. He was completely focused on the screaming infant, his expression a mixture of determination and desperation that Elena recognized instantly. She'd worn that same look in the mirror during Sophie's colicky nights, when nothing worked, and she'd been certain she was failing at the most important job in the world. "Excuse me," Elena said softly. Victor's head snapped up, his eyes meeting hers with the sharp wariness of someone accustomed to threats from unexpected quarters. Elena nearly stepped back from the intensity of that gaze. There was something dangerous in this man's face, not cruelty, but the kind of controlled power that came from years of never showing weakness. Up close, she could see the signs of exhaustion, shadows under his eyes, the tension in his shoulders, the barely perceptible tremor in his hands as he tried once more to coax the bottle into Gabriel's mouth. The baby turned his head away, screaming harder. "I'm sorry to intrude," Elena continued, having to raise her voice to be heard over the crying. "I'm a pediatric nurse. May I help?" Victor stared at her for a long moment. Elena held his gaze, letting him see whatever he needed to see. She knew she didn't look like much. Average height, brown hair pulled back in a messy ponytail, wearing jeans and an oversized sweater that had belonged to her late husband. Her face was pale, freckled, unremarkable, except for green eyes that held too much sadness for someone her age. "You're a nurse," Victor repeated, his accent making the word sound formal, precise. "Was," Elena corrected quietly. "I haven't worked since—" She stopped, unwilling to finish that sentence. "But I know that sound. He's not just hungry. He's grieving." Something flickered in Victor's expression. Not surprise, but recognition, as if she'd spoken a truth he'd been trying not to acknowledge. "His mother," Victor said, the words seeming to cost him something. "She died. Complications from the birth. 3 weeks ago." Elena's breath caught. Around them, the hostility in the cabin shifted subtly. Passengers who'd been preparing to complain suddenly found intense interest in their phones, their books, anything but the man holding his dead wife's child. "I'm so sorry," Elena whispered, and meant it with every fractured piece of her heart. "I've tried everything," Victor continued, his voice low and rough. "Formula, different bottles, holding him, walking him. He won't eat. Hasn't properly eaten since we left Paris. The doctor said, he stopped, jaw tightening. The doctor said sometimes they know. Somehow they know their mother is gone. Gabriel's cries had diminished slightly, as if the baby sensed the attention had shifted. Elena looked at the infant's red, tear-streaked face and felt something she'd thought was dead stir inside her chest. "May I?" she asked, holding out her arms. Victor hesitated. This was a test, Elena realized. He was measuring her, calculating risks she couldn't begin to understand. There was something more to this man than grief and exhaustion, something that made the air around him feel charged, dangerous. But whatever he saw in her face must have satisfied him, because he slowly, carefully transferred the screaming baby into her arms. The moment Gabriel settled against her chest, something shifted. Elena's body remembered before her mind did. Her arms curved instinctively into the right position. Her hand found the perfect spot to support the baby's head. She began swaying, a gentle rock step motion that came from muscle memory deeper than thought. She murmured, her voice dropping into the low, soothing register she'd used with countless babies over the years. Shh, little one. I know it hurts. Gabriel's cries didn't stop immediately, but they changed. The edge of desperation faded, replaced by the hiccuping sobs of exhaustion. Elena continued rocking, continued murmuring soft nonsense, and felt the baby begin to relax against her. Victor watched this transformation with an expression Elena couldn't read. His hands, now empty, had curled into fists at his sides. He needs warmth, Elena said quietly, still rocking. Skin-to-skin contact. The formula's fine, but he's not hungry for food. He's hungry for connection, for the heartbeat he's lost. She looked up at Victor, seeing him for the first time. Beneath the expensive suit and the dangerous edge, there was a man drowning in grief and responsibility he hadn't asked for. Did you bring any way to carry him? Elena asked. A sling or carrier? In the overhead compartment, Victor said. But I don't know how to. I'll show you, Elena said. Then before she could stop herself, if you'd like me to help, just until he settles. Victor's eyes narrowed slightly. Why would you do that? You don't know me. Because I know what it's like to lose someone, Elena thought. Because I know what it's like to feel like you're failing the one person who needs you most. Because I've spent 4 months wishing someone had offered to help me when my world fell apart. Because he needs it, Elena said simply. And because I can. The flight attendant, who'd been hovering nervously nearby, cleared her throat. I'm afraid you can't remain standing during flight, miss. We'll be taking off soon. Victor made a decision. Elena saw it happen in the slight relaxation of his shoulders, the way his eyes softened almost imperceptibly. Then sit, he said to Elena, gesturing to the empty seat beside him. Please. Elena should have said no, should have handed the baby back, returned to her seat, minded her own business. But Gabriel was quieting in her arms, and it had been so long since she'd held a baby, and maybe helping this child could give her grief a purpose beyond its endless, circular suffering. All right, she said, and sat down. The flight attendant looked uncertain but didn't argue when Victor leveled his gaze at her. There was something in his expression that suggested he wasn't accustomed to being questioned. The woman nodded and hurried away to prepare for takeoff. Elena settled into 2B with Gabriel against her chest. The baby's cries had faded to whimpers now, tiny fists clutching at her sweater. She could feel his rapid heartbeat through the blanket, gradually slowing as he began to calm. What's his name? Elena asked softly. Gabriel, Victor said. Gabriel Moreau. Hello, Gabriel, Elena murmured to the baby. You've had a terrible time, haven't you? But you're going to be all right. I promise you're going to be all right. Victor retrieved a carrier from the overhead bin, an expensive-looking contraption that he clearly had no idea how to use. Elena talked him through it with one hand, keeping Gabriel secure with the other. Together, they managed to get the baby settled against Victor's chest, the carrier holding him close enough to hear the steady thump of his father's heartbeat. Gabriel's eyes, dark and unfocused, began to drift closed. I can't believe it, Victor said quietly, staring down at his son. He's actually settling. He needed to feel safe, Elena said. Babies know when they're alone. The carrier helps him feel held. Why didn't the doctor tell me this? Maybe he did, and you couldn't hear it through the grief. Victor's jaw tightened, but he didn't argue. Around them, the cabin had relaxed. The crying had stopped, and passengers were returning to their books and screens, the crisis averted. The plane began its taxi down the runway. Elena should have returned to her seat, but the flight attendant had apparently decided not to make an issue of it. Besides, Gabriel was sleeping now, and Elena wasn't sure Victor could manage the carrier alone if the baby woke. That's what she told herself anyway. It was easier than admitting the truth that holding this baby, even for a few minutes, had made her feel something other than numb for the first time in months. "Thank you," Victor said as the plane lifted off, New York and the Atlantic falling away beneath them. "I don't know what I would have done if you hadn't helped." "You would have figured it out," Elena said. "Parents always do." "I'm not sure I qualify as a parent," Victor said, his voice hollow. "His mother and we weren't together long. The pregnancy was unexpected. I never planned for children." Elena heard everything he didn't say. "I don't know how to do this. I'm terrified. I loved her, and I've lost her, and now I'm alone with this tiny person I'm responsible for, and I have no idea what I'm doing." "Neither did I," Elena said quietly. "When my daughter was born, I was convinced I'd break her. I'd hold her and think about all the ways I could fail, all the things I could do wrong. It was paralyzing." "You have a daughter," Victor said, and it wasn't quite a question. "Had," Elena corrected, the word like broken glass in her throat. "She died 4 months ago. Car accident." The silence that followed was different from the earlier tension. This was the heavy quiet of shared grief, of two people who understood loss in ways that couldn't be explained to those who hadn't lived it. "I'm sorry," Victor said, and the formality had dropped from his voice, leaving something raw and genuine. "So am I," Elena said. They sat in silence as the plane climbed toward cruising altitude. Gabriel slept peacefully against Victor's chest, his breathing steady and calm. Outside the window, the last light of sunset painted the clouds in shades of amber and rose. "I should return to my seat," Elena said, though she didn't move. "Stay," Victor said, then more carefully. "If you're willing, in case he wakes, I'll pay for your ticket to be upgraded." Elena should have refused. This man was a stranger, and there was something about him that set off alarm bells in the back of her mind. The way people looked at him with fear beneath their irritation. The deference the flight attendant had shown despite the disruption. The sense that he was someone important, someone dangerous. But Gabriel was sleeping, and for the first time in months, Elena felt useful instead of shattered. "You don't need to pay me," she said. "But yes, I'll stay." The hours passed in strange intimacy. They didn't talk much, just watched Gabriel sleep, adjusted the carrier when he stirred, worked together to feed him when he finally woke hungry instead of hysterical. Elena showed Victor how to hold the bottle at the right angle, how to burp the baby without jostling him too much, how to read the tiny signals that indicated comfort or distress. Victor was a quick study. His hands, large and capable, learned to be gentle. He watched everything Elena did with intense focus, filing away each technique like battle tactics. "You're good at this," Elena said as Victor successfully got Gabriel to take half a bottle without fussing. "I'm good at learning what I need to survive," Victor replied. Then catching her expression, "That came out darker than I intended." "What do you do?" Elena asked. "For work, I mean." Victor's expression shuddered slightly. "Import-export, international trade. It's complicated and boring." It was a lie, or at least not the whole truth. Elena could hear it in the smooth way he delivered the words, the same tone people used when describing jobs they didn't want to explain. But she didn't push. Everyone had secrets, and she had her own. "And you?" Victor asked. "What brought you to London?" "My husband was British," Elena said. "We met when I was doing a nursing exchange program. Fell in love, got married, had Sophie. Then he died, cancer, 2 years ago. I thought staying in London would keep him alive somehow, keep us alive. But after Sophie..." She stopped, unable to finish. "You ran," Victor said, understanding in his voice. I ran, Elena confirmed. New York seemed far enough away from everything. It's not, Victor said quietly, but I understand the impulse. They fell into silence again, but it was comfortable now. Gabriel had eaten and fallen back asleep, his tiny hand wrapped around Elena's finger. She studied his face, the dark hair, the shape of his nose, the delicate curve of his ear. He looks like you, she said. He looks like her, Victor countered. His mother, Isabel. She had these same long lashes, the same stubborn chin. Tell me about her. Victor was quiet for so long Elena thought he wouldn't answer. Then, she was a pianist, concert level, trained at the Paris Conservatory. We met at a charity gala I was attending for business. She played Rachmaninoff like she was arguing with heaven. I'd never heard anything like it. His voice went distant, soft. She was fierce, brilliant, completely unsuited to my world, but she tried anyway. For Gabriel's sake. She tried. What happened? Elena asked gently. Preeclampsia, Victor said. It developed rapidly in the final weeks. The doctor said they caught it early, that everything would be fine. But during delivery, she started seizing. They did an emergency C-section, got Gabriel out safely. But Isabel, his jaw worked. She hemorrhaged. They couldn't stop it. I was there, holding her hand, and I couldn't do anything. All my money, all my power, and I couldn't save her. Elena's throat tightened. I'm so sorry, Victor. He looked at her, and she saw something vulnerable in his expression that she suspected he rarely showed anyone. The last thing she said to me, Victor continued, was take care of him. Not I love you or I'm scared. Just take care of him. Like she knew. Like she knew she was leaving me with this responsibility I had no idea how to handle. You're handling it, Elena said firmly. You got him out of Paris. You're taking him somewhere safe. You're learning. That's all any parent does. With your help, Victor pointed out. Without you, he'd still be screaming. He'd have settled eventually, Elena said. Babies always do. Maybe, Victor said, but I'm grateful it was sooner rather than later. The flight attendant appeared with a meal service, eyeing their arrangement with barely concealed curiosity. Elena and Victor managed to eat one-handed, sharing the awkward ballet of airplane food while keeping Gabriel undisturbed. It should have been awkward, but instead it felt almost natural, like they'd been doing this co-parenting dance for months instead of hours. As the cabin lights dimmed for the overnight portion of the flight, passengers settling into sleep around them, Elena found herself watching Victor with Gabriel. The way he'd relaxed into the carrier, one hand resting protectively over the baby's back, the way his breathing had synchronized with his son's. You love him, she said quietly. I barely know him, Victor replied. That's not what I asked. Victor was silent for a moment, then, yes, I love him. From the moment I saw him in the hospital, covered in blood and screaming, I loved him. It terrified me. Still does. Good, Elena said. That means you're doing it right. How do you figure? Because love is supposed to terrify you. It means you understand what you have to lose. Victor looked at her with those dark, dangerous eyes. You sound like someone who's lost a great deal. Don't we all? Elena countered. The hours stretched on. Gabriel woke once more, ate, and fell back asleep. Victor dozed fitfully, his body never fully relaxing despite his obvious exhaustion. Elena stayed awake, unable to sleep despite her own fatigue. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw Sophie's face, heard the sound of screeching tires, felt the terrible final weight of her daughter in her arms one last time. But sitting here with Gabriel's tiny breaths and Victor's presence beside her, the memories felt slightly less sharp, as if helping this broken little family had given her grief a direction other than inward. As dawn began to break over the Atlantic, painting the clouds in shades of pearl and gold, the captain's voice crackled over the intercom announcing their initial descent into New York. Elena realized with a start that she'd spent the entire flight in Victor's company. 7 hours had passed in what felt like minutes, and now it was ending. They would land, go their separate ways, and she would probably never see this man and his baby again. The thought hurt more than she expected. Thank you, Victor said as the plane began its descent, speaking over the rising hum of the engines. For everything. You saved us today. I just held a baby, Elena said, trying to keep her voice light. That's hardly saving anyone. You gave me hope, Victor said seriously, that I might actually be able to do this, that Gabriel might actually be all right. That's everything. Elena didn't know what to say to that. Before she could formulate a response, Gabriel stirred against Victor's chest, making small sounds of waking. Together they managed one final bottle and diaper change in the cramped airplane bathroom, a comedy of errors that left them both laughing helplessly, while Gabriel observed them with solemn dark eyes. By the time they returned to their seats for landing, something had shifted between them. Elena couldn't name it, but she felt it in the easy way they moved around each other now. The comfortable silence, the shared glances when Gabriel made a particularly adorable face. The plane touched down with barely a bump. Around them, passengers began gathering their belongings, eager to disembark after the long flight. Elena should have moved back to her original seat, but she stayed where she was, helping Victor gather Gabriel's things, repack the diaper bag, secure the carrier. Do you have someone meeting you? Victor asked as they waited for the cabin doors to open. In New York? No, Elena admitted. I have a sublet in Brooklyn. That's it. Victor studied her face. And here? Do you have family, friends? Not yet, Elena said. That's kind of the point. Start fresh. New city, new life. No one who knows. She gestured vaguely. No one who knows you're running from your grief, Victor supplied. Exactly. The cabin doors opened. The exodus began, passengers filing past them with carry-on bags and travel pillows. Victor made no move to stand. Neither did Elena. I know this is presumptuous, Victor said carefully, but I'd like to offer you a job. Elena stared at him. A what? A job. As Gabriel's nanny. Live-in position, if you're willing. Excellent salary, full benefits, private accommodations. He spoke quickly, like he was making a business pitch. I know you're trained as a nurse. I know you understand what he needs. And I know... He stopped, something vulnerable crossing his face. I know I can't do this alone. Victor, Elena said slowly. I don't even know you. You don't know me. This is... Crazy, Victor finished. I know, but I've built my career on reading people, on knowing who I can trust, and I trust you. I don't know why, but I do. Elena's mind raced. This was insane. She'd known this man for 7 hours. She knew nothing about him except that he was grieving, that he loved his son, and that there was something dangerous lurking beneath his polished exterior. But then she looked at Gabriel, sleeping peacefully in the carrier, and felt that strange stirring in her chest again. The first thing besides grief that had made her feel alive in months. I need to think about it, she heard herself say. Of course, Victor said, pulling a business card from his wallet. It was simple, expensive paper with just a name and phone number. Take all the time you need, but please, call me, even if it's just to say no. Elena took the card, feeling the weight of the decision settling on her shoulders. This could be a terrible mistake. Or it could be exactly what she needed, a purpose, a reason to get up in the morning, a chance to transform her grief into something useful. Okay, she said. I'll call. They disembarked together, moving through the airport in a bubble of shared focus. Immigration, baggage claim, customs. Victor navigated it all with the ease of someone who traveled frequently, while Elena helped manage Gabriel through the chaos. Other passengers gave them a wide berth, and Elena noticed the way people looked at Victor with recognition, with wariness, with something like fear. Who was this man, really? At the exit, a driver in a black suit waited holding a sign with Victor's name. He was broad-shouldered, alert, scanning the crowd with the sharp eyes of someone trained for security. When he saw Victor, his expression relaxed minutely. Mr. Moreau, the man said with a slight accent. Russian, Elena thought. Good flight? Eventful, Alexei, Victor replied. This is Elena Brooks. She'll need a ride to Brooklyn. Of course, sir. Victor turned to Elena. Think about my offer, please. Before she could respond, Gabriel woke with a small cry. Immediately, both Elena and Victor moved, her hand going to soothe, his adjusting the carrier. They caught each other's eyes and shared a small, tired smile. Call me, Victor said again. I will, Elena promised. Then he was gone, swept into the waiting car with Alexei carrying his bags. Elena stood on the curb watching the black sedan disappear into New York traffic, Gabriel's tiny face visible through the tinted window until the last possible moment. In her pocket, the business card felt like it was burning a hole through the fabric. She pulled it out, studying the simple text. Victor Moreau. A phone number. Nothing else. Elena thought about her empty apartment in Brooklyn, about the life she'd planned to build from nothing, about the grief that waited for her in every quiet moment. Then she thought about Gabriel's peaceful sleep in her arms, about Victor's desperate gratitude, about feeling useful, needed, alive for the first time since Sophie died. She pulled out her phone. The text was simple. It's Elena. When can we talk about the job? The response came before she'd even lowered her phone. Tonight. I'll send a car. Elena stared at the message, her heart pounding. She was either about to make the best decision of her life or the worst. But standing in the controlled chaos of JFK Airport, watching the city she'd run to spread out before her in the early morning light, Elena realized something. She was tired of running. Tired of letting grief make all her decisions. Tired of existing instead of living. Maybe it was time to take a leap of faith. Maybe it was time to see where this strange, impossible connection might lead. She typed back, "Send the address. I'll be ready." As she made her way to baggage claim to retrieve her single suitcase, everything she owned in the world, Elena felt something she hadn't felt in 4 months. Anticipation. Not hope, exactly, but maybe the beginning of it. A small, fragile thing that whispered that perhaps there was a future worth fighting for after all. Behind her, the morning sun rose over New York, painting the sky in shades of possibility. And ahead, somewhere in this vast, unknowable city, a baby cried for the comfort only she seemed able to give. The address Victor sent led Elena to a neighborhood she'd only read about in lifestyle magazines, the kind of place where doormen wore tailored uniforms and knew better than to ask questions. The car that picked her up from her sublet was the same black sedan from the airport, driven by the same silent Alexei who'd loaded her single suitcase into the trunk with the careful efficiency of someone handling explosives. Elena spent the 20-minute drive staring out the window, watching Brooklyn transform from her modest neighborhood of bodega-lined streets to the manicured elegance of Brooklyn Heights. Brownstones stood shoulder to shoulder like wealthy sentinels, their limestone facades glowing in the evening light. Trees she couldn't name arched over sidewalks where women pushed designer strollers and men in suits hurried home from Manhattan. This wasn't the fresh start she'd imagined. This was something else entirely. The car pulled up in front of a particularly grand brownstone, 4 stories of pristine architecture with wrought iron gates and windows that gleamed like dark mirrors. Alexei opened her door without a word, then carried her suitcase up the steps as if it weighed nothing. He pressed a code into an electronic panel Elena hadn't even noticed, and the heavy front door swung open. Inside, the home was a study in controlled elegance. Hardwood floors, the color of honey, stretched beneath high ceilings. Crown molding traced perfect lines along walls painted in warm neutrals. Modern art hung in precisely measured intervals, abstract pieces that probably cost more than Elena had earned in her entire nursing career. Everything was beautiful, expensive, and utterly impersonal, like a spread from Architectural Digest rather than a place where anyone actually lived. Except for the baby swing in the corner of the living room, surrounded by a scattered archipelago of burp cloths and bottles. That single disruption to the perfect order made Elena's chest tighten with something like recognition. Miss Brooks. A woman emerged from what Elena assumed was the kitchen, middle-aged, with steel-gray hair pulled back in a severe bun, and the ramrod posture of someone who ran tight ships. "I'm Mrs. Chen, Mr. Moreau's housekeeper. He's expecting you in the nursery, 3rd floor, 2nd door on the right." "Thank you," Elena managed, feeling desperately out of place in her jeans and sweater among all this refined wealth. Mrs. Chen's expression softened, almost imperceptibly. "For what it's worth, you're the first person who's made it past the front door since Gabriel arrived. Mr. Moreau doesn't typically invite strangers into his home." Elena didn't know what to say to that, so she simply nodded and climbed the stairs. Each step creaked slightly under her weight, the only sound in the hushed house besides her own breathing and the distant murmur of a voice from above. Victor's voice, low and rhythmic, speaking words she couldn't quite make out. The nursery door stood ajar, spilling warm light into the hallway. Elena paused at the threshold, suddenly uncertain. She'd texted a man she barely knew, agreed to come to his home, and was now about to walk into his private space to discuss caring for his infant son. When she laid it out like that, it sounded completely insane. But then Gabriel made a small, fussing sound, and Elena's body responded before her mind could catch up. She pushed the door open and stepped inside. The room was a stark contrast to the rest of the house. Where downstairs everything was perfect and cold, the nursery was warm and lived in. A crib stood against one wall, its sheets rumpled from use. A changing table overflowed with diapers and wipes. Baby clothes were draped over a chair, waiting to be folded. Books on infant care stood in crooked stacks on every available surface, their spines cracked from desperate consultation. And in the center of it all, Victor stood by the window with Gabriel against his shoulder, swaying slightly as he spoke in low French. He'd changed from his suit into dark jeans and a simple black sweater that made him look younger, less formidable. Without the armor of expensive tailoring, Elena could see the exhaustion written in the slope of his shoulders, the shadows under his eyes. He looked like every new parent she'd ever known, terrified, exhausted, and completely out of his depth. "Hi," Elena said softly, not wanting to startle him. Victor turned, and something in his expression shifted when he saw her. Relief, maybe, or gratitude. "You came." "I said I would." "People say many things." He moved toward her, and Elena got her first good look at Gabriel in proper light. The baby was awake but calm, dark eyes tracking movement with the unfocused attention of the very young. He'd changed in the 14 hours since the airport, or maybe Elena was just seeing him more clearly now. He had Victor's bone structure, sharp even in infancy, but something softer around the mouth and eyes that must have come from Isabel. "How is he?" Elena asked. "Better than he was," Victor admitted. "He's eaten 3 times since we got home, kept everything down. Slept for almost 4 hours straight, but I can't seem to put him down without him waking immediately. Mrs. Chen says I'm spoiling him." "Mrs. Chen is wrong," Elena said firmly. "You can't spoil a 3-week-old. He needs to be held. He's lost the only person who held him for 9 months. Everything feels wrong to him right now, except being against someone's heartbeat." Victor's jaw tightened. The doctors in Paris said the same thing, but they also said he'd adjust, that he'd accept bottle feeding within a week. It's been 3 weeks, and until you helped on the plane, he screamed through every feeding. "Because no one was helping you understand what he needed," Elena said. She moved closer, studying Gabriel's face. "May I?" Victor hesitated, then carefully transferred the baby into her arms. Gabriel made a small sound of protest at the disruption, but settled quickly against Elena's chest, one tiny hand fisting in her sweater. The weight of him, the warmth, the new baby smell. It all crashed over Elena like a wave, bringing memories of Sophie so vivid she had to close her eyes against them. But instead of drowning, she let herself float, let herself remember what it felt like to be needed like this, to be the entire world to someone so small. "You're good with him," Victor observed quietly. "He trusts you already." "Babies are simple," Elena said, opening her eyes. "They just want to feel safe. Everything else is negotiable." "I wish I'd known that 3 weeks ago." Victor ran a hand through his hair, leaving it disheveled. "I've been fighting him this entire time, trying to make him adapt to my schedule, my way of doing things. I didn't understand that I needed to adapt to him." "Most new parents don't," Elena said. "It's not instinctive for everyone. Some people have to learn it." "Like you?" Elena nodded slowly. "I was terrible at first with Sophie. I'd stand over her crib watching her breathe, convinced I was doing everything wrong. My husband used to find me crying in the bathroom at 3 in the morning because she wouldn't stop fussing, and I was certain it meant I was a bad mother. But you learned. Eventually, with help from other nurses, from books, from trial and error." She looked down at Gabriel, tracing one finger along his soft cheek. "What you need to understand, Victor, is that there's no manual for this. Every baby is different. Gabriel has his own personality, his own needs, his own way of communicating. Your job isn't to control him or fix him, it's just to learn his language." Victor was quiet for a long moment, watching her with those dark, assessing eyes. Then he said, "I want to hire you, not just as a nanny. as a teacher, someone who can show me how to do this properly. You're doing fine, Elena protested. I'm surviving, Victor corrected. There's a difference. I need to do better than survive. Gabriel deserves better than a father who's making it up as he goes. All fathers make it up as they go, Elena pointed out. That's called parenting. Then I need someone who's better at improvisation than I am. He moved closer, and Elena caught a hint of his cologne, something expensive and subtle that reminded her of libraries and old leather. I can pay whatever you ask. You'll have your own suite, complete privacy, time off whenever you need it. I just need help, please. There was something raw in his voice that made Elena's defenses crack. This wasn't a business negotiation. This was a desperate father begging for a lifeline. What exactly would you want from me? She asked carefully. Honestly, I don't know. I've never had a nanny before. Victor gestured at the chaos of the nursery. I've read 17 books on infant care in the past 3 weeks. I've called pediatricians, lactation consultants, sleep trainers. Everyone has different advice, and none of it seems to work. What I need is someone who can be here, in the moment, helping me figure out what Gabriel needs right now, not what a book says he should need, what he actually needs. Elena shifted Gabriel in her arms, feeling the baby's breath against her neck. You need a partner, someone who can share the load. Yes, Victor said simply. That's exactly what I need. And when Gabriel doesn't need me anymore, when you've learned his language and I'm no longer necessary, then we'll reassess, Victor said. But that won't be for months at least, and by then, maybe you'll have decided if you want to stay in New York or move on to somewhere else. Either way, you'll have time and resources to figure out your next step. It was logical, practical, and probably too good to be true. Elena's instincts screamed warnings. She didn't know this man, didn't understand what he really did for a living, didn't know what she might be walking into. The money alone should have been suspicious. Who paid a small fortune for a nanny unless they had something to hide? But Gabriel made a small, contented sound against her chest, and Elena felt something in her heart shift dangerously. I need you to be honest with me about something, she said quietly. On the plane, people were afraid of you. The way they looked at you, the way the staff treated you, that wasn't just respect. What do you really do, Victor? Victor's expression didn't change, but something shuddered behind his eyes. I told you. Told import-export, international trade. That's the sanitized version, Elena pressed. What's the real version? For a long moment, Victor didn't answer. He walked to the window, staring out at the darkening street below. When he finally spoke, his voice was measured, careful. My family has been in business for 3 generations. We facilitate transactions between parties who prefer discretion. We move goods across borders, manage supply chains, broker deals between people who don't entirely trust each other. Sometimes those goods are luxury items. Sometimes they're more complicated. Complicated, Elena repeated flatly. I don't deal in weapons or drugs, Victor said, turning to face her. I don't traffic people. I don't hurt anyone who doesn't hurt me first. But I operate in spaces where the law is more of a suggestion than a rule. And I deal with people who prefer to remain anonymous. Does that make me a criminal? Legally, probably not. Morally? He shrugged. That's a question I stopped asking myself a long time ago. Elena should have been horrified, should have handed Gabriel back and walked out the door. But she'd spent enough time around human nature to know that morality was rarely black and white. Her own husband had worked for a pharmaceutical company that priced life-saving medications beyond the reach of the poor. Was that less criminal than what Victor did, just because it was legal? Have you ever killed anyone? She asked bluntly. Yes. No hesitation, no softening. In self-defense, and in defense of people I'm responsible for. I won't apologize for that. I'm not asking you to apologize. I'm trying to understand what I'd be walking into. Victor moved closer, his gaze intense. You'd be walking into a house where a baby needs care and a father needs help. Nothing more complicated than that. I keep my business separate from my home. Always have. Gabriel will grow up knowing nothing about what I do unless he chooses to ask when he's old enough to understand. And the people you deal with? They won't come here, won't threaten him to get to you. No one knows about this house except my most trusted people. Alexei, Mrs. Chen, my attorney. I bought it under a shell corporation, paid cash, left no trail. As far as anyone in my professional life knows, I live in a penthouse in Manhattan. This place is off the grid. Elena wanted to believe him. More than that, she needed to believe him, because Gabriel was warm in her arms, and Victor's desperation was genuine, and the alternative was going back to her empty sublet in Brooklyn to stare at walls and count the days since Sophie died. If I do this, she said slowly, I need total honesty. About your work, about potential risks, about anything that might affect Gabriel's safety. I can't protect him if I don't know what I'm protecting him from. Agreed, Victor said immediately. And I need your word that if I ever feel like he's in danger, I can take him and leave. No questions, no interference. Victor's eyes narrowed slightly. You'd leave with my son? To keep him safe? Yes. That's the job you're offering me, isn't it? To put Gabriel first? For a long moment, they stared at each other in a test of wills. Then Victor's expression shifted into something that might have been respect. Yes, he said. That's exactly the job I'm offering. And if you ever feel you need to run with him, I'll help you do it, because you'll be right. His safety comes first, always. Elena studied his face, looking for deception and finding only exhausted sincerity. Maybe she was being naive. Maybe this was the worst decision she'd ever made. But standing in this nursery with Gabriel sleeping against her heart, Elena realized she was going to say yes. Not because of the money, or the beautiful house, or the chance to escape her grief, but because this baby needed her, and after 4 months of feeling useless and broken, being needed felt like oxygen after drowning. All right, she said, I'll do it. But we start with some ground rules. Relief washed over Victor's features so clearly that Elena almost smiled. Whatever you need. First, I need you to trust me. When I tell you Gabriel needs something, I need you to believe me even if it contradicts what you've read or what some expert said. Every baby is different, and I'll know what this particular baby needs. Done. Second, you need to be present. I'm not a replacement parent. I'm support. You're his father, and he needs to bond with you. That means you change diapers, you do feedings, you get up in the night. I'll be there to help, but I won't do it for you. Victor nodded slowly. That's fair. Third, we maintain boundaries. This is a professional relationship. I have my space. You have yours. We're partners in caring for Gabriel, but we're not friends. We're not family. We're colleagues. Something flickered in Victor's expression that Elena couldn't read. Of course. And fourth, Elena said, we're honest with each other about everything. If you're struggling, you tell me. If I'm struggling, I tell you. No pretending we're fine when we're not. Gabriel will pick up on tension and dishonesty. He needs stability, which means we need to communicate. Agreed, Victor said. Is that all? For now. I reserve the right to add more as we go. Victor actually smiled, a small, tired thing that made him look almost boyish. You're going to be good at this. I hope so, Elena said. She looked down at Gabriel, now deeply asleep in her arms, his face peaceful in a way she suspected it hadn't been much lately. When do you want me to start? Is now too soon? Elena thought about her sublet with its bare walls and secondhand furniture, thought about the silence waiting for her there, the empty hours she'd fill with grief and regret, thought about waking up tomorrow with no purpose except surviving another day. Then she thought about waking up to Gabriel's cries, to the challenge of teaching Victor how to be the father he wanted to be, to the possibility that helping this broken family might help her put her own pieces back together. Now works, she said. Mrs. Chen appeared like magic when Victor called, showing Elena to a suite on the second floor that was larger than her entire London apartment had been. Hardwood floors, a 4-poster bed with white linens, a sitting area with a view of the garden, and a bathroom with a clawfoot tub that made Elena's eyes widen. It was beautiful, luxurious, and completely overwhelming. Mr. Moreau had it prepared after you texted, Mrs. Chen explained, setting Elena's pathetic single suitcase on the bed. If you need anything, clothing, toiletries, anything at all, just let me know and I'll arrange it. This is too much, Elena said faintly. This is Mr. Moreau, Mrs. Chen replied with the hint of a smile. He doesn't do anything halfway. You'll get used to it. After Mrs. Chen left, Elena stood in the center of the suite and tried to process the past 24 hours. Yesterday, she'd been alone on a plane to New York, running from grief with no plan beyond survival. Now she was living in a brownstone in Brooklyn Heights, agreeing to care for a baby whose father openly admitted to operating outside the law, and somehow it all felt right in a way nothing had felt right since Sophie died. She unpacked her meager belongings, a week's worth of clothes, a few photographs, the stuffed rabbit that had been Sophie's favorite toy, and tried not to think about how empty her suitcase looked in this enormous closet. Tomorrow she'd worry about practical things like buying appropriate clothes for this job. Tonight she just needed to breathe. A soft knock on the door interrupted her thoughts. Victor stood in the hallway, Gabriel still sleeping against his shoulder in the carrier. "I'm sorry to disturb you," he said quietly, "but I was wondering if you might help me with his bedtime routine. I've been trying to follow the schedule the pediatrician recommended, but he fights sleep every time I put him down." Elena checked her watch. 8:30. "What time does the pediatrician say he should go to bed?" 7. "And what time does he naturally get tired?" Victor blinked. I don't know. I've been trying to keep him to the schedule." "That's your first problem," Elena said gently. "He's 3 weeks old. He doesn't have a schedule. He has rhythms, patterns, needs. Come on, let me show you something." She led Victor back to the nursery, where they carefully removed Gabriel from the carrier without waking him. Elena showed Victor how to read the baby's cues, the way his eyelids fluttered when he was in light sleep versus deep sleep, the tension in his tiny body when he was about to wake, the subtle changes in breathing that indicated different sleep stages. "You're trying to force him into a schedule before he's developmentally ready," Elena explained quietly. "Right now, he needs to eat every 2 to 3 hours, sleep when he's tired, and be held when he's scared. That's it. The schedule can come later once he's settled." The pediatrician doesn't live here," Elena interrupted gently. "We do. And we need to pay attention to what Gabriel is telling us, not what a book says he should be doing." They spent the next hour practicing, Victor learning to swaddle properly, to recognize different types of cries, to hold Gabriel in positions that helped with gas and digestion. Elena watched Victor's large hands learn to be gentle, watched his intense focus soften into something almost tender. "You're a quick study," she said as Victor successfully got Gabriel to burp after a feeding. "I'm motivated," Victor replied, his voice rough with emotion. "I lost Isabel. I can't lose him too." "You won't," Elena promised, hoping desperately that she could keep that promise. "Not if we work together." Gabriel fell asleep around 10, not because they forced him to, but because he was finally ready. They put him in the crib, and for the first time since Paris, he stayed asleep when Victor stepped away. "I can't believe it," Victor whispered, staring at his son like he was witnessing a miracle. "Believe it," Elena whispered back. "You did that. You learned what he needed, and you gave it to him." They crept out of the nursery like thieves, leaving the door cracked and a baby monitor glowing on the dresser. In the hallway, Victor turned to Elena with an expression of such profound gratitude that she had to look away. "Thank you," he said simply, "for everything, for taking a chance on us." "Thank you for giving me a reason to get out of bed tomorrow," Elena replied before she could stop herself. Victor's expression shifted into something more complex. Understanding, maybe, or shared recognition of grief's peculiar weight. "We're both running from something, aren't we?" "Maybe," Elena admitted. "Or maybe we're running towards something. It's too early to tell." "Either way," Victor said, "I'm glad you're here." "So am I," Elena said, surprised to find she meant it. She went to bed that night in sheets that smelled like lavender, in a room too big for one person, in a house that belonged to a man she barely knew. She should have been terrified, should have been questioning every decision that led her here. Instead, she fell asleep thinking about Gabriel's tiny hand wrapped around her finger, and for the first time in 4 months, she didn't dream about Sophie's accident. When Gabriel's cries woke her at 2 in the morning, Elena was up and moving before she was fully conscious. She met Victor in the hallway, both of them bleary-eyed and rumpled, and together they stumbled into the nursery to face the challenge of a nighttime feeding. It took 45 minutes, 2 diaper changes, and a lot of patient coaxing, but eventually Gabriel was fed, burped, and sleeping again. Victor stood over the crib with the exhausted satisfaction of someone who just won a battle. "We did it," he said, sounding faintly amazed. "We did," Elena confirmed, "and we'll do it again in 3 hours when he wakes up hungry." Victor groaned, but he was smiling. "This is what I signed up for." "This is what we both signed up for," Elena corrected. As she walked back to her suite, Elena realized something had shifted. The boundaries she'd insisted on felt less important now. The professional distance she'd demanded felt arbitrary. They weren't colleagues anymore, if they ever really had been. They were something else, something she didn't have a name for yet. Two people bound together by a baby's needs and their own broken hearts, learning to trust each other in the small hours of the morning when the rest of the world slept. It wasn't the fresh start Elena had imagined when she boarded that plane to New York. It was something far more complicated, far more dangerous, and far more real. And as she fell back into bed, listening to Victor's footsteps fade down the hallway, Elena couldn't shake the feeling that she'd just stepped into a story that would change everything. The rhythm established itself over the following weeks like a tide finding its pattern. Gabriel woke every 3 hours with clockwork precision, and Elena and Victor learned to move through the darkness like dancers who'd rehearsed the same routine 1,000 times. They didn't need words anymore in those midnight hours, just the quiet shuffle of footsteps, the rustle of blankets, the soft sounds of a baby learning to trust the world again. Elena watched Victor transform. The dangerous edge she'd glimpsed that first day softened around Gabriel, though she noticed it never entirely disappeared when Alexei came to the house for their brief private meetings. Victor's business continued somewhere beyond the walls of the brownstone, conducted in low voices behind closed doors, but it never touched the nursery. Never touched the moments when Victor learned to read his son's different cries, when he mastered the swaddle, when he walked Gabriel through colicky evenings with the patience of someone discovering reserves he didn't know he possessed. 3 weeks into her tenure, Elena came downstairs to find Victor in the kitchen at 6 in the morning, Gabriel asleep in a sling against his chest while he attempted to operate the espresso machine one-handed. "You're getting good at that," she said, accepting the cup he offered her. "I'm getting good at a lot of things I never imagined I'd need to know." Victor shifted Gabriel slightly, his hand automatically supporting the baby's head. "Did you know I can now change a diaper in under 30 seconds? Alexei timed me yesterday." He was disturbingly impressed. Elena smiled around her coffee cup. These moments of domesticity still surprised her, seeing this man who admitted to operating outside the law struggling with burp cloths and baby monitors like any other new parent. "How did your meeting go?" "The usual. Problems that need managing, people who need reminding of agreements they made." Victor's expression darkened slightly. "Nothing you need to worry about." But Elena had started noticing things. The way Alexei's visits had increased in frequency. The tension in Victor's shoulders when he emerged from those closed-door conversations. The calls he took at odd hours, speaking in rapid French or sometimes Russian. His voice taking on an edge that made her remember exactly who he was beneath the sleep-deprived father exterior. "Victor," she said carefully, "is everything all right? With your work, I mean?" He was quiet for a long moment, studying Gabriel's sleeping face. "There's a situation developing. Nothing immediate, nothing that will touch this house. But I'd be lying if I said everything was fine." "What kind of situation?" "The kind where certain people think my recent absence from day-to-day operations indicates weakness." Victor's jaw tightened. "I've spent the past month focused on Gabriel, delegating more than I usually do. Some of my associates are wondering if I've lost my edge, if I'm vulnerable." Elena's stomach clenched. "Are you? Vulnerable?" Victor met her gaze, and she saw the cold calculation there that reminded her this man hadn't built an empire through kindness. "No. Distracted, perhaps, but never vulnerable. I'm handling it." "How?" "By making it very clear that my priorities have shifted, but my capabilities haven't." He glanced down at Gabriel, something almost tender crossing his face. "And by ensuring that anyone who mistakes fatherhood for weakness learns otherwise." The word should have frightened her. Instead, Elena felt a strange sense of security. This was a man who would protect his son with the same ruthless efficiency he applied to his business. Whatever threats existed in his world, they wouldn't reach Gabriel. Victor wouldn't allow it. Still, she found herself saying, "If things become dangerous, you'll be the first to know," Victor interrupted. "I promised you honesty. I meant it." The situation escalated on a Tuesday afternoon when Elena was giving Gabriel a bath in the nursery sink. She'd just wrapped him in a towel when she heard raised voices from downstairs, Victor's measured tone cutting across someone else's agitation. Then the sound of breaking glass. Elena's training took over. She grabbed Gabriel, wrapped him securely, and moved to the nursery door. The voices grew louder, and she caught fragments of conversation in Russian, the words harsh and accusatory. Through the crack in the door, she saw Alexei appear at the base of the stairs, his hand moving inside his jacket in a way that made Elena's blood run cold. "Stay upstairs," Alexei called to her in English, his accent thicker under stress. "Lock the door. Don't come down until Mr. Moreau says." Elena's hand shook as she turned the lock, pressing her back against the door with Gabriel clutched to her chest. The baby, sensing her fear, began to whimper. She forced herself to breathe slowly, to rock him gently, to make soothing sounds even as her heart hammered against her ribs. More voices. More Russian. Then Victor's voice cut through everything else, cold and absolute, speaking words Elena couldn't understand but whose meaning was unmistakable. The room went silent. Footsteps on the stairs. Elena pressed herself harder against the door, ready to run if the wrong person came through. "Elena," Victor's voice, controlled but tight. "It's me. You can open the door." She unlocked it with trembling fingers. Victor stood in the hallway, his expression carved from stone, a cut above his left eyebrow bleeding slowly down his temple. Behind him, Alexei was speaking rapidly into a phone in Russian. "What happened?" Elena demanded, pulling Victor into the nursery and pushing him into the rocking chair. Gabriel was crying in earnest now, and she juggled the baby while searching for something to press against Victor's cut. "A misunderstanding," Victor said, which was such an obvious lie that Elena wanted to shake him. "Don't," she said sharply, finding a clean burp cloth and pressing it to his eyebrow. "Don't insult my intelligence. Who was that? What did they want?" Victor's eyes met hers, and for the first time since she'd known him, she saw something like fear beneath the control. Not fear for himself, fear of what she might do with the truth. "Associates of someone I've had dealings with," he said carefully. "They came to express concerns about a recent business transaction. Things got heated." "Heated enough for breaking glass and Alexei reaching for a weapon?" "Yes." Elena stepped back, still holding Gabriel, still trying to process what had just happened. "You said this house was safe, that your business wouldn't come here." "It shouldn't have," Victor said, anger bleeding into his voice. "This was a violation of protocols that govern how we operate. They knew better than to come to my home. That's why they're leaving now and won't be coming back." "How can you be sure?" "Because I've made it very clear what happens to people who threaten my family." The word hung in the air between them, unexpected and weighty. Victor seemed to realize what he'd said, his expression flickering with something vulnerable. "I need you to trust me, Elena. This won't happen again." "You can't promise that," Elena said quietly. "Not in your world." "No," Victor admitted. "But I can promise that I'll do everything in my power to keep you and Gabriel safe. And my power is considerable." Elena looked at the baby in her arms, now quieting against her chest, then at Victor with blood still seeping through the cloth pressed to his forehead. She thought about the boundaries she'd insisted on, the professional distance she'd demanded, and realized they'd been fiction from the start. You couldn't live in someone's home, care for their child, navigate midnight feedings and colicky evenings together, and maintain the pretense that you were just colleagues. "I need to know everything," she said finally. "Not just the sanitized version. If I'm going to stay here, if I'm going to keep Gabriel safe, I need to understand exactly what kind of threats might come through that door." Victor studied her for a long moment, weighing something she couldn't see. Then he nodded slowly. "All right, but not here, not in front of Gabriel. Tonight, after he's asleep, we'll talk. I'll tell you everything." Mrs. Chen appeared in the doorway, her usual composure slightly ruffled. "Mr. Moreau, The situation downstairs is resolved. Alexei says the parties have departed and won't return. Thank you, Mrs. Chen. Victor stood steadier now. Please arrange for the window to be repaired today and increase security on the perimeter. I want to know if anyone comes within a block of this house. After Mrs. Chen left, Victor turned back to Elena. I'm sorry for bringing this to your door, for putting you in a position where you had to be afraid. I'm not afraid, Elena said, surprised to realize it was true. I'm angry. There's a difference. Something that might have been respect flickered in Victor's eyes. Yes, there is. That night, after Gabriel was asleep and the brownstone had settled into quiet, Elena found Victor in his study on the first floor. She'd never been invited into this room before. It was the one space in the house that remained entirely his. Dark wood paneling, floor-to-ceiling bookshelves, a massive desk that looked like it had witnessed a century of important decisions. And on the walls, art that Elena recognized now as extremely valuable. A Modigliani sketch, what looked like a small Chagall, pieces that belonged in museums. Victor sat behind the desk with a tumbler of amber liquid, the cut above his eyebrow cleaned and closed with butterfly bandages. He looked exhausted, the careful control he maintained slipping at the edges. Scotch? He offered, gesturing to the decanter. Please. He poured her a generous measure, and Elena settled into the leather chair across from him, cradling the glass in both hands. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then Victor said, My family's business started 3 generations ago in Lyon. My great-grandfather was a jeweler who discovered that wealthy clients sometimes wanted to move assets across borders without attracting attention. He was very good at facilitating those movements. Smuggling, Elena said bluntly. Essentially, but high-end smuggling, conducted with discretion and style. My grandfather expanded the operation, moving into art, antiquities, luxury goods, anything valuable that needed to travel quietly. My father took it international, establishing networks across Europe, Asia, eventually the Americas. Victor took a sip of his scotch, his gaze distant. By the time I inherited control, we were operating in 40 countries with connections to everyone from oligarchs to royalty. We move approximately $2 billion in goods annually, some of it entirely legal, some of it in gray areas, some of it crossing lines I try not to think about too carefully. What kind of lines? We've transported stolen art for private collectors. We've moved money for people whose governments would very much like to freeze their assets. We've brokered sales of objects whose provenance is questionable at best. He met her eyes. But I've kept certain boundaries, no weapons, no drugs, no human trafficking. Those are non-negotiable. The men today, Elena prompted. What did they want? 6 months ago, I facilitated a transaction for a Russian oligarch, artwork moving from a private collection in Moscow to a buyer in Dubai. The pieces were acquired legally, but the sale needed to happen quietly to avoid certain tax implications. I arranged transport, authentication, delivery. Everything went smoothly. And now the Russian authorities are investigating the original sale, questioning whether the artwork was actually privately owned or whether it was stolen from state museums during the Soviet collapse. My client is claiming I never told him the provenance was questionable. He wants me to take responsibility, to claim I misrepresented the pieces. If I do that, I face prosecution in Russia. If I don't, he'll retaliate. Elena's stomach sank. What kind of retaliation? The usual, business disruptions, threats, possibly violence against my associates. Victor's jaw tightened. The men today were warning me that I have a week to decide. Take the fall or face consequences. What are you going to do? Neither, Victor said simply. I'm going to provide proof that my client knew exactly what he was buying, that I fulfilled my contractual obligations to the letter, and that any attempt at retaliation will be met with exposure of his entire operation to authorities on 3 continents. That sounds dangerous. It is. But backing down is more dangerous. In my world, the moment you show weakness, you're finished. People need to know that I'm not someone they can threaten with impunity, father or not. Elena sipped her scotch, letting the burn ground her. And if they don't back down, if they come after you anyway, then I'll handle it. Victor's voice was flat, final. What I won't do is allow them to threaten this house or anyone in it. That's why I'm telling you this, so you understand that if I ask you to take Gabriel somewhere safe, even for a few days, you do it immediately without questions. Where would we go? I have a property upstate, remote, secure, completely off the grid. Alexei would take you, stay with you until the threat passed. You'd be safe. And you? I'd resolve the situation and come get you. Elena heard what he wasn't saying, that resolving it might mean violence, might mean crossing lines even he preferred not to cross. Have you killed people, Victor? Beyond self-defense? He was quiet for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. Then, yes, twice. Both times, people who'd betrayed me in ways that would have destroyed everything I'd built. Both times, I gave them chances to make things right. Both times, they chose to escalate. Do you regret it? I regret that it was necessary, but I don't regret protecting what's mine. And Gabriel? Elena asked softly. What happens when he's old enough to ask questions about what you do? Victor's expression cracked, showing the fear beneath. I don't know. I've been asking myself that since Isabel told me she was pregnant. She wanted me to get out, to leave the business, start legitimate. I was making plans, considering options. Then she died, and suddenly I was alone with a newborn and responsibilities I couldn't just walk away from. Can't or won't? Both. Victor ran a hand through his hair, frustration evident. I have people who depend on me for their livelihoods, associates who've trusted me for years. If I suddenly disappeared, there would be chaos. People would get hurt, and I have enemies who would see it as an opportunity to settle old scores. So you're trapped. I prefer to think of it as committed. His mouth twisted bitterly. Though trapped is probably more accurate. Elena studied him across the desk. This man who held an empire with one hand and a baby bottle with the other, who spoke casually of billion-dollar transactions and worried about getting the swaddle right. She should have been horrified by what he told her, should have packed her bags and left. Instead, she found herself saying, "Then we'll figure it out together." Victor's eyes widened slightly. Elena, I'm not saying I approve of what you do, she interrupted. I'm not saying I'm comfortable with any of this, but I am saying that Gabriel needs his father, and his father needs help navigating this impossible situation. So we'll figure it out, one day at a time. Why? Victor asked quietly. Why would you stay after hearing all of this? Elena thought about Sophie, about the drunk driver who'd killed her, about how fragile and unfair life could be. Because I understand that the world isn't black and white. Because I've seen enough grief to know that good people sometimes make complicated choices. And because that baby upstairs deserves to have people who care about him, regardless of what his father does for a living. I don't deserve your compassion. Maybe not, Elena agreed, but Gabriel deserves someone who'll fight for his chance at a normal life. And right now, that's me. Victor stood, moving around the desk until he was standing directly in front of her chair. He reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away, and took her hand. His grip was warm, solid, and Elena felt something electric pass between them at the contact. Thank you, he said, his voice rough with emotion, for seeing me as more than just my worst choices. Elena squeezed his hand, ignoring the way her heart had started beating faster. We're all more than our worst choices, Victor. That's what I'm learning. They stood like that for a moment, hands clasped, the air between them charged with something Elena didn't want to name. Then Gabriel's cry echoed through the baby monitor, breaking the spell. That's my cue, Elena said, pulling her hand free and standing. Your turn for the 2 a.m. feeding. Our turn, Victor corrected, following her out of the study. And it was their turn, Elena realized, as they climbed the stairs together toward Gabriel's cries. Somewhere along the way, without her noticing exactly when it happened, they'd stopped being employer and employee, stopped being strangers bound by circumstance. They'd become partners in the truest sense, two people navigating impossible terrain together, learning to trust each other's strengths and forgive each other's weaknesses. The situation with the Russian oligarch resolved itself over the following week, though Elena only learned the details in fragments. Alexei's visits increased, sometimes bringing other men who spoke in low, urgent tones behind closed doors. Victor spent hours on encrypted calls, his voice cold and commanding in ways that made Elena remember exactly who he was. And then, one morning, it was simply over. The men stopped coming. The calls stopped. And Victor emerged from his study with the tension finally gone from his shoulders. "It's handled," was all he said, and Elena knew better than to ask for details. But the incident changed something between them. The careful boundaries Elena had insisted on felt absurd now that she'd seen Victor bleeding, had listened to him confess the full truth of his life, had chosen to stay despite everything. They stopped pretending distance was possible and settled into something more honest. A partnership built on shared responsibility for Gabriel and a growing trust that neither of them had planned on. Elena found herself looking forward to the late-night feedings, to the quiet conversations they'd have while Gabriel nursed. Victor told her about Isabel, about falling in love with someone so different from his world, about the guilt of bringing her into danger she hadn't signed up for. Elena told him about her husband David, about Sophie's laugh, about the particular shape of grief that came from losing a child. They learned each other's rhythms, anticipating needs before they were spoken. Victor knew that Elena needed coffee before conversation in the morning. Elena knew that Victor got quiet and withdrawn when business stress was weighing on him, and that the best cure was putting Gabriel in his arms and letting the baby's needs pull him back to the present. 6 weeks after Elena had moved into the brownstone, she woke to find Victor in the nursery at 4 in the morning, not because Gabriel was crying, but because he was sitting in the rocking chair watching his son sleep with an expression of such profound love and terror that it made Elena's chest ache. "Can't sleep?" she asked quietly from the doorway. Victor didn't startle. "He's getting bigger. Did you notice? His face is filling out. He looks less like a newborn and more like an actual person." "They do that," Elena said, moving into the room. "Grow up when you're not looking. I keep thinking about all the things I'm going to miss. First words, first steps, first day of school. I'll be there, but I'll also be running an empire, taking calls at midnight, dealing with crises. What if I'm too distracted? What if I fail him the way I failed Isabel?" Elena knelt beside the rocking chair, putting her hand on Victor's arm. "You didn't fail Isabel. What happened to her was a medical tragedy, not something you could have prevented, and you're not going to fail Gabriel." "How can you be sure?" "Because I've watched you these past weeks. I've seen you learn everything from scratch, seen you put his needs above your business empire, seen you hold him at 3 in the morning when he won't stop crying and never once complain about it. That's not failing. That's exactly what he needs." Victor's eyes shimmered in the dim light of the nursery. "What about when he's older? When he starts asking questions about why other kids' fathers have normal jobs? When he realizes his father is a criminal?" "Then you'll tell him the truth," Elena said simply. "That you made choices you're not entirely proud of, that you operate in a complicated world, but that you've always tried to maintain your own code of honor. And you'll give him the choice to make his own decisions about the kind of man he wants to be." "You make it sound so simple." It's not simple, but it's possible." Elena squeezed his arm. "You don't have to have all the answers right now, Victor. You just have to love him and show up. The rest will figure itself out." Victor covered her hand with his, and the gesture felt significant in ways Elena wasn't ready to examine. "You're good at this." The reassurance, the perspective. "Is this what you did as a nurse?" "Sometimes. When parents were scared and needed someone to tell them they weren't ruining their children." Elena smiled sadly. "I was better at comforting other people than I ever was at comforting myself." "What do you need?" Victor asked quietly. "To feel comforted?" The question caught Elena off guard. No one had asked her that since Sophie died. Everyone assumed they knew: time, space, sympathy. But Victor was asking what she actually needed, not what he thought she should need. "Honestly," Elena said, "I need to feel useful. I need to believe that Sophie's death wasn't the end of my ability to help children, that there's still purpose in what I know, what I've learned. Being here, helping Gabriel, teaching you. It makes me feel like maybe I'm not completely broken." "You're not broken," Victor said firmly. "You're grieving. There's a difference." "Is there?" "Because most days I can't tell." Victor turned in the chair, his dark eyes intense on hers. "Yes, because broken means beyond repair. Grieving means hurt, but healing. And I see you healing, Elena. Slowly, but it's happening." Elena felt tears prick her eyes and blinked them back. "How can you see that when I can't?" Because you smile now when Gabriel does something adorable. Because you laugh at my terrible attempts at lullabies. Because you're here in this moment, choosing to help instead of choosing to hide. That's not broken. That's brave. The tears spilled over then, and Elena didn't try to stop them. Victor pulled her closer, and she let herself lean against the rocking chair, let herself accept comfort from this impossible man in this impossible situation. They stayed like that for a long time, Gabriel sleeping peacefully between them, two broken people learning to hold each other up. When Elena finally pulled away, wiping her eyes, she said, "We're a mess, aren't we? A criminal and a grieving nurse playing house with an orphaned baby." "The best stories usually start with messy premises," Victor said, and there was something in his smile that made Elena's heart skip. "Is that what this is? A story?" "I think it's becoming one." Victor reached out, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear in a gesture so tender it made Elena's breath catch. "Whether it's a good story or a tragic one, I haven't figured out yet." "Let's aim for good," Elena whispered. "Deal," Victor said. The moment hung between them, charged with possibility and danger in equal measure. Elena knew she should pull away, should remember the boundaries she'd insisted on, should recognize that getting emotionally involved with Victor Moreau was probably the worst decision she could make. But Gabriel chose that moment to stir, making small sounds of waking, and the spell broke. They both moved automatically into the familiar routine of a nighttime feeding, the intimacy of the moment transforming into the practical intimacy of shared childcare. Later, back in her own bed, Elena stared at the ceiling and tried to make sense of what was happening. She'd come to New York to escape her grief, to disappear into anonymity. Instead, she'd found herself tangled up in the life of a man who operated outside the law and a baby who needed more than she knew how to give. And the terrifying part was that she didn't want to leave. Despite the danger, despite the complications, despite every rational voice in her head screaming warnings, Elena wanted to stay, wanted to see Gabriel grow up, wanted to help Victor figure out how to be the father he desperately wanted to be. Wanted things she had no business wanting from a man whose world could explode into violence at any moment. But wanting and having were different things, and Elena was old enough to know that not every feeling needed to be acted upon. So she made herself a promise in the darkness of her too-large room. She would stay for Gabriel. She would help Victor navigate fatherhood. She would be the best nanny, the best support, the best partner in childcare that she could be. And she would ignore the way her heart jumped every time Victor smiled at her, the way her skin burned where he touched her, the way she'd started looking forward to their late-night conversations more than anything else in her day. It was the only way to protect herself from getting hurt again, the only way to maintain the control she needed to survive. Or at least, that's what she told herself as she finally drifted off to sleep. Gabriel's soft breathing echoing through the baby monitor beside her bed, a lullaby of need and trust and impossible possibilities. The promise Elena made to herself lasted exactly 11 days. She knew because she'd been counting, marking each day as a small victory of maintaining boundaries, of keeping her heart locked safely away. But on the 11th night, Gabriel spiked a fever that sent both Elena and Victor into crisis mode, and somewhere between the pediatrician's emergency visit and the endless hours of taking turns holding a miserable, burning baby, something fundamental shifted. It was 3 in the morning when Gabriel's temperature finally broke. Elena had been walking him around the nursery for the past hour, humming soft songs while Victor sat slumped in the rocking chair, his head in his hands, looking more terrified than she'd ever seen him. When the baby's skin finally cooled beneath her palm and his whimpering quieted into exhausted sleep, she felt Victor's relief like a physical wave. "He's better," she whispered. "The fever's down." Victor's head snapped up, and in 2 strides he was beside her, his hand joining hers on Gabriel's forehead. Their fingers overlapped, and neither of them moved to break the contact. "Thank you," Victor breathed, and there was something raw in his voice that went beyond gratitude. "I thought, when he wouldn't stop crying, when he felt so hot, I thought I was losing him too." "You're not," Elena said firmly, but her own fear had been just as sharp. She'd lost Sophie so suddenly, so completely, that every childhood illness now felt like a harbinger of disaster. "He's going to be fine. It's just a virus. Babies get them all the time." "I know that intellectually," Victor said, still not moving his hand from where it touched hers. But knowing it and believing it are different things when you're watching your child suffer and can't fix it. Elena understood that too well. She'd spent 4 months knowing intellectually that Sophie's death wasn't her fault, that there was nothing she could have done differently, but believing it remained impossible. Some truths lived only in the mind, never quite making the journey to the heart. "Come on," she said softly. "Let's get him settled. You need to sleep." Together they maneuvered Gabriel into his crib, both of them holding their breath until they were certain he'd stay asleep. Then Victor turned to her in the dim nursery light, and Elena saw that his defenses had finally crumbled completely. He looked devastated, exhausted, and utterly human. "I can't do this alone," he said quietly. "I know I hired you to help, but it's more than that now. I need you, Elena, not just for Gabriel, for me." The admission hung between them like a confession. Elena knew she should deflect, should remind him of boundaries and professional distance, but she was so tired of lying to herself about what this had become. "I know," she whispered. "I need you too." Victor's eyes searched her face, and Elena saw the exact moment he understood what she was admitting. The air between them shifted, charged with recognition of something they'd both been fighting. "This is a terrible idea," Victor said, but he was already moving closer. "The worst," Elena agreed, and then his hands were cupping her face, and his mouth was on hers, and every rational thought evaporated like morning fog. The kiss was gentle at first, tentative, both of them testing boundaries they'd sworn not to cross. But then Victor's hand slid into her hair, and Elena's fingers curled into his shirt, and gentle transformed into desperate. They kissed like people who'd been starving without realizing it, like this was oxygen after drowning, like they'd been moving toward this moment since that first meeting on the airplane and had only been delaying the inevitable. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Victor pressed his forehead to hers. "Tell me this isn't just exhaustion and fear talking." "It's not," Elena said, her hands still fisted in his shirt. "I've been trying not to feel this for weeks. It hasn't worked." "We can't," Victor said, but his hands were still in her hair, still holding her close. "You work for me. You're vulnerable. I'm a criminal, I know," Elena finished. "You're dangerous and complicated and probably the last person I should want. But I stopped caring about should around the same time I realized I was counting the minutes until you came home each day." Victor made a sound that was half laugh, half groan. "You're supposed to be the rational one." "Apparently not." Elena pulled back just enough to meet his eyes. "But I need you to understand something. I can't do casual. After Sophie, after David, I don't have it in me to give pieces of myself away without meaning it. So if this is just stress relief for you, if it's just convenience because I'm here and you're lonely, I need you to tell me now." "Elena." Victor's thumb traced her cheekbone with devastating gentleness. "I haven't felt anything remotely casual about you since you walked down that airplane aisle and saved my son. You terrify me because I've spent the past month watching you and wanting things I have no right to want." "What things?" "A future where Gabriel has a mother who loves him. A partner who sees all my flaws and stays anyway. A life that's more than just survival and obligation." His voice dropped lower. "You. I want you in every way it's possible to want someone." Elena's breath caught. "That's a lot of wanting." "Too much?" She kissed him again in answer, softer this time, but no less certain. When she pulled back, she said, "No, it's exactly right, because I want those things too. I want to watch Gabriel grow up. I want to help you figure out how to balance being a father with being who you are. I want—" She stopped, fear catching in her throat. "What?" Victor prompted gently. "I want to stop feeling broken," Elena whispered. "And when I'm with you, when we're taking care of Gabriel together, I feel like maybe that's possible. Like maybe I can be whole again." Victor's arms came around her fully then, pulling her against his chest. Elena let herself lean into his strength, let herself accept the comfort she'd been refusing herself for months. They stood like that in the quiet nursery with Gabriel sleeping peacefully nearby, two damaged people choosing to trust each other with their fractured hearts. "What happens now?" Elena asked against his shoulder. "I don't know," Victor admitted. I've never done this before, tried to build something real with someone who knows exactly who I am. We figure it out, Elena said, echoing words she'd spoken to him weeks ago. One day at a time. You make it sound simple. It's not, but neither is anything else we've managed so far. They stayed wrapped in each other until Gabriel stirred, then separated to handle the baby's needs with the practiced efficiency they'd developed. But everything felt different now. Every accidental touch carried weight. Every shared glance held meaning. They'd crossed a line neither of them could uncross, and Elena felt equal parts terrified and exhilarated by what that meant. The next morning, Mrs. Chen took one look at them across the breakfast table and raised an eyebrow so sharp it could have cut glass. "I see," was all she said, but her tone carried volumes. "Is it that obvious?" Elena asked after Victor left to take a business call. "My dear," Mrs. Chen said, pouring fresh coffee, "I've worked for Mr. Moreau for 5 years. I've never seen him look at anyone the way he looks at you. And you light up when he walks into a room. Yes, it's obvious." Elena's face heated. "Is that going to be a problem?" Mrs. Chen was quiet for a moment, her expression thoughtful. "That depends. Are you planning to hurt him?" "What? No, of course not." "Then we have no problem." Mrs. Chen's stern expression softened slightly. "He's a good man trapped in a complicated life. He deserves happiness. So do you. If you can give each other that, I'm not going to interfere. But be careful. His world is dangerous, and caring about him means accepting that danger. Make sure you understand what you're signing up for." Elena thought about the broken glass, the men who'd come to the house, the tension that sometimes rolled off Victor like storm clouds. "I think I'm starting to." "Good. Then we'll say no more about it." Mrs. Chen paused at the kitchen door. "Except that it's about time. That baby needs a mother, and you need a reason to remember you're still alive. This could be good for everyone." After Mrs. Chen left, Elena sat alone with her coffee and tried to process what she'd done. She'd kissed her employer, had admitted to feelings that went far beyond professional, had essentially committed to building something with a man whose business dealings operated in moral gray areas at best. And despite all the reasons it was a terrible idea, Elena didn't regret it. The days that followed established a new rhythm. Publicly, to the outside world, nothing changed. Elena remained Gabriel's nanny, Victor remained her employer. But privately, in stolen moments between feedings and business calls, they began building something neither of them had planned for. Victor would find excuses to brush past her in the hallway, his hand lingering on her waist. Elena would lean into him during late-night feedings, letting herself accept the comfort of his presence. They'd share looks across rooms that spoke volumes neither of them was quite ready to say aloud yet. 2 weeks into this new arrangement, Alexei cornered Elena in the kitchen while Gabriel napped. The Russian's expression was as unreadable as always, but there was something sharp in his gaze that made Elena's spine straighten. "Ms. Brooks," he said carefully, "may I speak frankly? I'd prefer it. Mr. Moreau is distracted, happy, which is good, but also distracted, which is dangerous in his position. People notice when a man like him changes his patterns. They wonder what's causing it. They look for vulnerabilities." Elena's stomach clenched. "Are you saying I'm making him vulnerable?" "I'm saying that happiness is a vulnerability in his world, and that there are people who would exploit it if they knew where to strike." Alexei's expression softened almost imperceptibly. "I like you, Ms. Brooks. You're good for him, good for Gabriel, but you need to understand that being important to him makes you a target. I thought this house was safe, that no one knows about it. It is, and they don't. But eventually someone will notice something, a pattern in his movements, an unusual expense, something, and when they do, they'll investigate. They'll find you and Gabriel, and they'll see you as leverage." Elena's hands tightened on her coffee cup. "What are you suggesting I do? Leave?" "No." Alexei's answer was immediate. "Leaving would destroy him right now. But I'm suggesting you learn to protect yourself. And Gabriel, let me teach you basic security protocols, how to recognize threats, how to disappear if you need to. Is that really necessary?" Alexei's expression turned grim. I've worked for Mr. Moreau's family since I was 20 years old. I've seen what happens when people in this business let their guard down. It's always the ones they love who pay the price. The word sent ice through Elena's veins. All right, teach me. Over the following weeks, Elena received an education in survival she'd never imagined needing. Alexei taught her to notice when someone was following her, to vary her routes when running errands with Gabriel, to recognize the signs of surveillance. He showed her the panic buttons hidden throughout the house, the safe room in the basement, the emergency protocols she should follow if something went wrong. You think I'm paranoid, Alexei said one afternoon as they went over evacuation routes for the third time. I think you're thorough, Elena corrected, and I'm grateful, even if I hope I never need any of this. Hope is good. Preparation is better. Victor noticed the change in her awareness, the way she now checked sight lines and exit routes automatically. Alexei's been training you, he said one evening, not quite a question. He thought I should know how to protect Gabriel if something happens. And you agreed to this? Yes. Elena met his gaze steadily. Because he's right. Your world is dangerous, and pretending it's not doesn't make Gabriel safer. This way, if something goes wrong, I'll know what to do instead of freezing in panic. Victor's jaw tightened. I hate that this is necessary. So do I. But it is, so I'm learning. Elena touched his arm gently. This doesn't change how I feel about you, Victor. It just means I'm going into this with eyes open. Most people would run. I'm not most people. You should have figured that out by now. Something fierce and tender crossed Victor's face. He pulled her close, kissing her with an intensity that stole her breath. I don't deserve you. Probably not, Elena agreed when she could speak again, but you're stuck with me anyway. The real test of their relationship came 6 weeks after that first kiss, when Victor's business exploded into crisis. Elena woke to find him already gone at 4 a.m, a terse note on his pillow saying only that he'd be back as soon as he could and to stay in the house. Mrs. Chen was tight-lipped at breakfast, and Alexei appeared mid-morning with 2 additional security personnel who stationed themselves at the entrances. No one would tell Elena what was happening, only that Victor was handling it and she should remain calm for Gabriel's sake. Remaining calm proved impossible as the hours stretched on with no word. Elena's imagination ran wild with possibilities. Victor arrested, Victor hurt, Victor caught in some violence he couldn't escape. She went through the motions of caring for Gabriel, but her attention was split between the baby and her phone, waiting for updates that didn't come. It was nearly midnight when she heard the front door open. Elena had been pacing the living room for hours, Gabriel finally asleep upstairs under Mrs. Chen's watchful eye. She rushed into the foyer to find Victor looking like he'd aged a decade in 18 hours. His suit was rumpled, his tie long since discarded, and there was a hardness in his eyes that made him look like the dangerous man he was instead of the gentle father she'd come to know. Victor, she started, but he held up a hand. Not here. Upstairs. Please. Elena followed him to his bedroom, a space she'd never entered before. It was as austere as the rest of the house. Minimal furniture, dark colors, nothing personal except a single photograph of Isabel on the nightstand. Victor collapsed onto the bed, his head in his hands, and Elena felt her heart crack at the exhaustion in every line of his body. What happened? She asked gently, sitting beside him. Someone tried to move against me, attempted to seize control of my European operations while I was distracted with Gabriel. Victor's voice was flat, drained. They underestimated how quickly I could respond. It's handled now, but it required methods I'm not proud of. Did you? Elena stopped, unsure how to ask. Kill anyone? No. But I destroyed careers, dismantled alliances, and made it very clear what happens when people mistake my recent absence for weakness. He looked at her with haunted eyes. I had to become someone I've been trying to leave behind. Someone cold and ruthless and willing to burn everything down to protect what's mine. Elena reached for his hand, lacing their fingers together. But you did protect it. And you came home. I came home, Victor agreed. But I'm not sure the person who came home is someone you should want around Gabriel. Around you. Don't, Elena said sharply. Don't pull away because you had to make hard choices. You think I don't understand that sometimes the world forces us into impossible positions? This is different. You were a nurse. You saved lives. I destroy them when it's convenient. I watch children die, Elena said quietly, the words costing her something. Children I couldn't save no matter how hard I tried. I made decisions about who got resources and who didn't. I triaged, which is just a clinical word for choosing who has a better chance of survival and letting the others go. Don't tell me I don't understand difficult choices, Victor. I've made plenty. Victor turned to look at her fully, surprise in his expression. You've never talked about that before. Because I don't like remembering. But you need to hear it now. You need to understand that I'm not some innocent who's going to judge you for operating in a gray world. I've lived in gray too. Maybe different shades, but gray nonetheless. You're trying to make me feel better about being a criminal. I'm trying to make you see that you're more than just your worst moments. That you're a father who loves his son. A man who keeps his promises. Someone who's trying to be better even when it's hard. Elena cupped his face, forcing him to hold her gaze. I see all of you, Victor. The dangerous parts and the gentle parts. And I'm choosing to stay anyway. Why? The question was barely a whisper. Because I'm falling in love with you, Elena said, the truth spilling out before she could stop it. Because when I'm with you, I feel alive again instead of just surviving. Because you look at me like I'm someone worth saving, and I haven't felt worth anything since Sophie died. Victor's breath caught. Elena, you don't have to say it back, she said quickly. I know this is complicated and probably too fast, and he kissed her, cutting off her rambling with a desperation that spoke louder than words. When they finally broke apart, he said, I fell in love with you the night you stayed awake for 12 hours straight, helping me learn to swaddle properly. I've been terrified of it ever since. Terrified? Because everyone I love dies or leaves. My mother, my father, Isabel. Love feels like a curse, like I'm marking you for tragedy just by caring about you. Elena's heart ached for him. Love isn't a curse, Victor. It's a risk, but it's the only risk worth taking. Even with someone like me? Especially with someone like you. She kissed him softly. Because you deserve to be loved despite your flaws, not in ignorance of them. And I'm choosing to love you anyway. Victor's arms came around her, pulling her close with a fierceness that bordered on desperate. They stayed like that for a long time, holding each other in the darkness of his bedroom while the city slept outside and Gabriel dreamed peacefully down the hall. What happens now? Victor asked eventually, echoing her question from weeks ago. Now we figure out how to make this work. How to build a life that keeps Gabriel safe and lets us be together and doesn't require you to become someone you hate. That's a tall order. Then it's a good thing we're both stubborn. Elena pulled back to look at him. I'm serious, Victor. If we're going to do this, if we're going to be together, things need to change. You can't keep operating the way you have been. Gabriel's going to grow up soon, start asking questions, and I won't be part of teaching him that his father's business is something shameful we have to hide. Victor was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, I've been thinking about that, about getting out, going legitimate. It wouldn't be immediate. I have obligations, people who depend on me, but maybe over the next few years I could transition the business into something legal. Is that possible? I don't know, but I want to try. For Gabriel, for you, for myself. He brushed hair back from her face. I want to be someone my son can be proud of, someone you don't have to make excuses for. I don't make excuses for you, Elena said, but I would like to not worry every time you leave the house that you might not come back. That's fair. Victor's smile was tired but genuine. So we figure it out together, one day at a time. One day at a time, Elena agreed. They made love that night with a tenderness that felt like healing, like two broken people learning to trust that maybe they could be whole together. Afterward, lying tangled in Victor's sheets with his arm around her, Elena felt something she hadn't felt since before Sophie died. Hope. Not the desperate, grasping hope of someone drowning, but the quiet, steady hope of someone who could see a path forward. It wouldn't be easy. Victor's world was still dangerous, still complicated, still full of threats she was only beginning to understand, but they'd face it together. Her strength supporting his weakness, his strength supporting hers, both of them united in their determination to give Gabriel the stable, loving home he deserved. In the nursery down the hall, Gabriel slept peacefully, unaware that his life had just changed irrevocably, unaware that the woman his father had hired to care for him was now becoming something more, unaware that he was the catalyst that had brought two grieving, damaged people together and given them a reason to choose hope over despair. Elena drifted off to sleep, wrapped in Victor's arms, listening to his heartbeat slow and to the steady rhythm of rest. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new fears, new obstacles to navigate. But tonight, in this moment, they had each other. They had Gabriel. They had the fragile, precious beginning of something that might actually last. And for two people who'd lost so much, that felt like everything. The fragile peace lasted 3 months before Victor's past came for them in the worst possible way. Elena should have recognized the signs. Alexei's increased vigilance, the way Victor started insisting she take different routes to the pediatrician, the additional security cameras that appeared overnight around the brownstones' perimeter. But she'd been lulled into complacency by the rhythms of their new life together. Gabriel's first laugh, Victor's tentative steps toward legitimizing his business, the quiet joy of waking up each morning wrapped in arms that made her feel safe. She should have known that in Victor's world, safety was always an illusion. It happened on a Tuesday afternoon in early autumn. Elena had taken Gabriel to Prospect Park, their usual outing when the weather was fine. Alexei followed at a discreet distance, as he always did, close enough to intervene but far enough to maintain the pretense of normalcy. Gabriel was 5 months old now, alert and curious, babbling at the leaves that drifted down from the trees in shades of amber and gold. Elena had just settled on their favorite bench, Gabriel on her lap reaching for the sunlight filtering through branches, when Alexei's phone rang. She saw his expression change, saw him move closer with urgency, tightening his features. "We need to go," he said quietly. "Now." "What's wrong?" "Someone's been asking questions about you, about Gabriel. We need to get back to the house immediately." Elena's training kicked in. She gathered Gabriel without panic, moving quickly but calmly toward the car Alexei had already brought around. They were 3 blocks from the brownstone when 2 black SUVs boxed them in from both sides, forcing Alexei to brake hard enough that Elena had to brace herself to keep Gabriel secure. "Get down!" Alexei commanded, his hand already reaching for the weapon Elena knew he carried. "And do not leave this car no matter what happens." Men emerged from the SUVs, 4 of them, dressed in dark suits that screamed professional muscle. Elena's heart hammered against her ribs as she ducked low, covering Gabriel's body with her own, one hand reaching for the panic button on the key fob Alexei had given her weeks ago. "We just want to talk," one of the men called out in accented English. Russian, Elena thought, with ice in her veins. "About Mr. Moreau's recent business decisions. We believe he might benefit from some perspective." "You can schedule a meeting through proper channels," Alexei replied, his voice cold and steady, despite being outnumbered 4-1. "This approach violates protocols Mr. Moreau takes very seriously." "Mr. Moreau has been making poor choices lately, distracted by domestic concerns when he should be focused on business obligations. We're here to remind him what's at stake." One of the men moved toward the car, and Elena's breath stopped. She pressed Gabriel closer, her whole body a shield, and felt the baby begin to whimper at her fear. "Shh," she whispered desperately. "Please, sweetheart, stay quiet." The car door handle moved. Elena's vision narrowed to that single point of entry, every muscle in her body coiled for fight or flight. Then the sharp crack of a gunshot split the air, and everything exploded into chaos. Alexei had fired a warning shot over the approaching man's head, and suddenly everyone was moving. More gunfire, shouts in Russian, the screech of tires. Alexei was back in the car in seconds, throwing it into reverse with one hand while still holding his weapon in the other. "Hold on!" he barked, and then they were careening backward down the narrow Brooklyn street, Gabriel screaming now in Elena's arms, her whole world reduced to keeping him safe as the car fishtailed around corners and bullets pinged off reinforced metal. They made it to the brownstone in less than 2 minutes. The gates were already open. More security personnel Elena had never seen before positioned at strategic points. Alexei practically carried her inside, Gabriel still wailing in her arms, and didn't stop moving until they were in the basement safe room that Elena had only seen during drills. "Stay here," Alexei commanded, his face grim. Do not open this door for anyone except Mr. Moreau or me. There's food, water, everything you need. The door is reinforced steel. You're safe. Where's Victor? Elena demanded, her voice shaking as badly as her hands. On his way. He'll be here within the hour. Alexei's expression softened fractionally. You did well, Ms. Brooks. You kept Gabriel safe. That's all that matters. Then he was gone, and Elena was alone in the windowless room with a screaming baby and terror clawing at her throat. She forced herself to focus, to move through the steps Alexei had taught her. Check Gabriel for injuries, none, just fear and confusion. Change him, feed him, comfort him. Compartmentalize the fear. Deal with one thing at a time. Gabriel eventually quieted against her chest, exhausted from crying, his tiny fist clutching her shirt. Elena held him and tried not to think about how close they'd come. How easily one of those bullets could have found them. How her decision to love Victor Moreau had just put an innocent child directly in the line of fire. The door opened an hour later to reveal Victor, and Elena had never seen him look so terrifying. His face was carved from ice, his eyes burning with a fury that made her instinctively press Gabriel closer. But when he saw them, when he saw they were unharmed, the rage cracked to reveal something raw and desperate underneath. Elena, he breathed, and then he was across the room, his arms around both of them, his whole body shaking with reaction. Thank God. Alexei told me what happened. If they'd hurt you, if they'd touched Gabriel, we're okay, Elena said, though her voice wobbled dangerously. Alexei got us out. We're okay. Victor pulled back just enough to check them both over, his hands gentle despite the violence still thrumming through his frame. This is my fault. I should have moved faster, should have seen this coming. They were sending a message, that they could reach you anytime they wanted. Who were they? Associates of the oligarch from months ago. The situation I thought was resolved. Victor's jaw clenched. Apparently he's been biding his time, waiting for the right moment to demonstrate that I'm not untouchable, that my new priorities have made me weak. What are you going to do? Victor's eyes went cold again. What I should have done the first time. Eliminate the threat permanently. Elena's stomach lurched. Victor, no. If you kill him, you'll start a war. More people will come after you, after us. If I don't, he'll keep coming. He'll escalate until he succeeds in hurting you or Gabriel just to prove a point. Victor cupped her face, and Elena saw the terrible resolve there. I can't let that happen. I won't. There has to be another way. There isn't. Not in my world. You show weakness, you die. It's that simple. Elena looked at Gabriel, sleeping peacefully now despite everything, and felt something crystallize in her chest. Then maybe it's time to leave your world behind. Victor stared at her. What? You said you wanted to go legitimate, to get out. What if you did it now, completely? Walk away from all of it. Elena, it's not that simple. I have obligations, people who depend on me. And what about your obligation to Gabriel? Elena interrupted, her voice fierce. What about your obligation to give him a life where he doesn't have to hide in safe rooms because his father made enemies? Where he can go to the park without armed escorts? Where the woman who loves him doesn't have to be terrified every time she leaves the house? You think I don't want that? Victor's voice cracked. You think I don't lie awake at night imagining a normal life for him? But walking away means leaving behind everything I've built, everyone I'm responsible for. It means those people become vulnerable to the same predators trying to hurt us now. So give them to someone else. Sell the business, transfer control, whatever you have to do. But get out before Gabriel is old enough to understand why people are shooting at him. Elena grabbed Victor's hand, pressing it to Gabriel's sleeping form. Look at him. Really look. Is this the life you want for him? Because if you stay in this world, this will never end. There will always be another threat, another enemy, another reason why we have to live like prisoners. Victor looked down at his son, and Elena watched the war play out across his face. Everything he'd built versus everything he loved. Power versus peace. The man he'd been versus the man he wanted to become. If I walk away, he said slowly, I'll have powerful enemies. People who'll see it as betrayal or weakness. Leaving might make us more vulnerable, not less. Or, Elena said quietly, it might take away their leverage. If you're not a player anymore, what's the point of coming after you? You can't threaten someone who has nothing left to lose. I'd have everything to lose. I'd have you and Gabriel. But they wouldn't know that. Not if we disappear properly. New names, new city, new life. Alexei said he could arrange it if we ever needed to run. What if we did? What if we just left all of this behind and started over somewhere clean? Victor was quiet for a long time, his hand still resting on Gabriel's back, feeling the steady rise and fall of the baby's breath. When he finally spoke, his voice was raw. I'd be giving up everything my family built. 3 generations of work, connections, power. Gone. But you'd have Gabriel, Elena said, and me, and a chance to be the father you want to be instead of the one your world demands. Isn't that worth more than power? She watched him struggle with it, this man who'd never backed down from anything, never shown weakness, never let anyone push him into retreat. But then Gabriel stirred against her chest, making small sounds of waking, and something in Victor's expression shifted. Yes, he said quietly. It is. The next 72 hours passed in a blur of action that left Elena's head spinning. Victor made calls, arranged meetings, set in motion a plan so audacious Elena could barely believe it was possible. He contacted his most trusted associates and offered them the business, not a sale, but a gift, on the condition that they honor his exit and never contact him again. Some accepted immediately, grateful for the opportunity. Others argued, begged him to reconsider, warned him of consequences. Victor remained unmoved. I'm done, he told them all, his voice carrying an authority that brooked no argument. I'm out. Anyone who has a problem with that can take it up with Dmitri. Dmitri was Victor's second-in-command, a man Elena had met only once, but whose reputation for ruthless efficiency preceded him. Putting him in charge was Victor's insurance policy. Dmitri was feared enough that most people wouldn't dare challenge the transition of power. While Victor handled the business side, Alexei coordinated their disappearance with the precision of someone who'd done this before. New identities were created, social security numbers, birth certificates, complete backstories. Elena Brooks became Elena Walsh, a widow from Seattle. Victor Moreau became Michael Walsh, her husband and Gabriel's father. Gabriel's birth certificate was amended to list both of them as parents. We'll go to Colorado, Alexei explained, spreading maps across the dining room table. Small town in the mountains, population under 5,000. I've already purchased a house under a shell corporation, arranged for bank accounts to be set up. You'll have enough money to live comfortably for years, but nothing flashy. You need to blend in, become ordinary. I've never been ordinary in my life, Victor said, but there was something almost wistful in his voice. Then you'll learn, Alexei replied, for Gabriel's sake. The hardest part was saying goodbye. Mrs. Chen cried openly when they told her, pressing gifts into their hands and making them promise to send word somehow that they were safe. Alexei maintained his stoic expression, but Elena saw the emotion in his eyes when he shook Victor's hand one final time. You're doing the right thing, Alexei said quietly. Gabriel will never have to know what you were. He'll just know you as his father. Take care of them, Victor said, meaning the people he was leaving behind. Make sure Dmitri honors the agreements. I will, but you need to let go completely. No checking in, no monitoring from afar. You're dead to this world, Mr. Moreau. Michael Walsh doesn't have a past in international trade. I understand. They left in the middle of the night, slipping away from the brownstone Elena had come to think of as home, like thieves fleeing a crime scene. 1 suitcase each, Gabriel's car seat and diaper bag, and nothing else. Everything they'd built in Brooklyn stayed behind. The nursery with its carefully chosen decorations, the kitchen where they'd shared midnight conversations, the bed where they'd first made love. Elena took one last look at the brownstone's elegant facade as their car pulled away and felt tears slip down her cheeks. She'd come to New York running from grief, and she was leaving running from danger. But this time, she wasn't running alone. Victor reached over and laced his fingers through hers. Second thoughts? No, Elena said, surprising herself with how much she meant it. Just saying goodbye to who we were. Who were we? Broken, lost, alone. She squeezed his hand. But we're not anymore. The drive to Colorado took 3 days. They stayed in anonymous motels, paid cash, avoided cameras. Gabriel was an excellent traveler, content to sleep in his car seat or babble at the changing landscape outside the windows. Elena watched America unfold through the windshield, the endless highways, the small towns, the mountains that grew larger on the horizon with each passing mile. Their new home was everything Alexei had promised: small, remote, and utterly ordinary. A two-story farmhouse on the outskirts of a town called Cedar Ridge, surrounded by pine trees and snow-capped peaks. The nearest neighbor was half a mile away. The town itself had one grocery store, one diner, one school that served kindergarten through 12th grade. "This is it," Victor said as they pulled into the driveway, his voice carefully neutral. "Our new life." Elena looked at the farmhouse with its peeling paint and sagging front porch, so different from the Brooklyn brownstone's elegant perfection. "It's perfect. It's falling apart. Then we'll fix it, together." They spent the first week just settling in, learning to navigate their new identities like actors rehearsing for opening night. Victor, no, Michael, introduced himself to neighbors as a consultant working remotely. Elena was a former nurse taking time off to care for their son. They'd moved from Seattle for the slower pace, the clean air, the good schools. People accepted their story without question. Small towns didn't pry, didn't judge, didn't care about your past as long as you were friendly and paid your bills on time. Elena found herself relaxing in a way she hadn't in months, no longer constantly looking over her shoulder for threats. Victor struggled more with the adjustment. He was used to power, to respect, to people jumping when he spoke. In Cedar Ridge, he was just another guy in jeans and a flannel shirt, trying to figure out how to fix a leaky faucet without calling someone to do it for him. "I don't know how to be normal," he admitted one evening as they sat on the porch watching Gabriel play on a blanket in the grass. "I keep waiting for something to go wrong, for someone to recognize me, for it all to fall apart." "It won't," Elena said, leaning against his shoulder. "We're safe here. We can actually breathe. What if I'm boring as a normal person? What if you realize you fell in love with the danger and excitement, and Michael Walsh from Cedar Ridge can't give you that?" Elena turned to look at him, at this man who'd given up an empire to keep them safe. "Victor, I didn't fall in love with your danger. I fell in love with the way you learned to swaddle Gabriel, even though your hands were shaking, the way you stayed up all night when he had a fever, the way you looked at me like I was the answer to questions you'd been asking your whole life." She cupped his face, holding his gaze. "Michael Walsh might not run an international smuggling operation, but he's still the man who chose his son over power. That's not boring. That's heroic." Victor's eyes shimmered with emotion. "I'm terrified of failing you, of Gabriel growing up and realizing his father is nothing special." "Then we'll teach him that being special isn't about money or power or danger. It's about showing up, doing the work, loving the people who matter." Elena kissed him softly. "You're already special, Victor. You just have to learn to see it." The months that followed were an education in ordinary life. Victor learned to fix things around the house, discovering a surprising aptitude for carpentry and plumbing. Elena found work at the local clinic, part-time hours that let her still be there for Gabriel. They joined the community center, attended town meetings, became just another family in a small Colorado town. Gabriel thrived in the peace. His laughter filled the farmhouse. His curiosity explored every corner of their new life. He didn't remember Brooklyn, didn't remember the fear and violence that had marked his earliest months. To him, this was normal: a father who played with him in the yard, a mother who sang him to sleep, a life defined by love instead of survival. On Gabriel's first birthday, they threw a small party in the backyard. Neighbors came, bringing casseroles and gifts, treating them like they'd always been part of Cedar Ridge. Elena watched Victor, Michael, laugh at something the hardware store owner said, bounce Gabriel on his knee, and look genuinely happy in a way she'd never seen in Brooklyn. "He's doing well," a voice said beside her. Elena turned to find Sarah, the woman who lived on the neighboring property, holding her own toddler. "Michael, when you first moved here, he seemed so tense, like he was waiting for something bad to happen, but he's relaxed now." "We both have," Elena said, realizing it was true. "This place has been good for us." Cedar Ridge has that effect: small enough that you matter, big enough that you can have privacy. Sarah smiled. I'm glad you're here. So am I, Elena said, and meant it with her whole heart. That night, after the guests had left and Gabriel was asleep, Elena and Victor sat on the porch under a sky full of stars that New York had never shown them. The air smelled of pine and wood smoke, clean and sharp. Do you miss it? Elena asked quietly. Your old life? Victor was quiet for a long moment, considering. Sometimes I miss the certainty of it. Knowing exactly who I was, what I was good at, where I fit in the world. But then I look at Gabriel, at you, at this life we've built, and I realize that certainty was a cage. I was powerful, but I wasn't free. And now? Now I'm free. And that's terrifying and exhilarating in equal measure. He pulled her closer. I don't know if I'm doing this right, this normal life thing, but I know I want to keep trying. For Gabriel, for you, for myself. You're doing it perfectly, Elena assured him, because you're here. That's all that matters. Well, they sat in comfortable silence, watching the stars wheel overhead, listening to the night sounds of their new world. And Elena thought about the journey that had brought them here, from a crying baby on an airplane to this quiet moment of peace. She'd come to New York broken by grief, certain she had nothing left to give, and she'd found Victor, equally broken, equally certain he was beyond redemption. Together they'd built something neither of them had believed possible. Not just survival, but genuine happiness. Not just existence, but a life worth living. Gabriel's cry drifted through the open window, and they both stood automatically, moving together toward the nursery like a dance they'd perfected. Victor lifted their son, his son in every way that mattered now, and Gabriel immediately settled, recognizing the safety of his father's arms. Shh, little one, Victor murmured, the words soft and sure. Everything's all right. Daddy's here. Elena watched them together and felt her heart swell almost painfully. This was what she'd been searching for without knowing it. Not escape from grief, but a reason to move through it and come out the other side. Not forgetting Sophie, but honoring her memory by choosing to love again, to build a family again, to believe in happiness again. I love you, she said to Victor, to Gabriel, to both of them. So much. Victor looked up and smiled, the expression transforming his face into something young and unguarded. We love you too. And it was that simple, that complicated, that perfect. Three people who'd been broken finding wholeness in each other. A father learning that real power came from love, not control. A mother discovering that her capacity for love hadn't died with her daughter. A child growing up safe and cherished, never knowing the darkness his first months had held. Outside, snow began to fall, the first of the season, covering Cedar Ridge in pristine white. Inside the farmhouse, the Walsh family settled in for the night. Gabriel asleep in his crib, Victor and Elena wrapped in each other's arms, the future stretching before them full of ordinary, precious possibilities. Elena had boarded that plane to New York, certain that her story was over, that the best parts of her life were behind her. But she'd been wrong. Sometimes the story doesn't end where you think it will. Sometimes a baby's cry can change everything. Sometimes a dangerous man can choose love over power. Sometimes broken people can heal each other if they're brave enough to try. And sometimes, just sometimes, the fresh start you were looking for finds you when you're least expecting it, 30,000 feet in the air, reaching out to comfort a stranger's child. That moment on the plane had been a door opening. Walking through it had been terrifying. But on the other side was this: warmth and safety, and love and home. It was more than Elena had dared to hope for. It was everything she never knew she needed. And as she drifted off to sleep in Victor's arms, listening to Gabriel breathe peacefully in the next room, Elena understood that grief hadn't destroyed her capacity for joy. It had just been waiting for the right moment, the right people, the right reason to believe in tomorrow. They'd all found that reason in each other. And that was the beginning, not of a perfect life, but of a real one. Messy and complicated and beautiful and worth every risk they'd taken to get here. The cry that had broken the silence had led them home.